sometimes we hit problems and we treat them as problems, and sometimes they shouldn't be treated as problems. The whole idea of what is a problem and what isn't a problem is somewhat nuanced. And if a problem can be fixed, it isn't really a problem. It's just a temporary stumbling block. A problem is something you can't fix, and you have to take a step back and find another way. And those are two different ways of approaching, so to say, problems. The one is this something I need to work on fixing, or is this something that can't be fixed and I need to pull back and find an alternative route? And understanding that difference is important. And we'll see this in our Gemara. Problems that can be fixed. Nishpach min הכלי הריצפה. Zevachim, this is Daf Lamed Beis Amud Aleph and Lamed Daled Amud Beis. We'll be working with both Dafim at the moment. And it's important, those of you who are not into the learning, who are not into the technical side of the learning, as will happen a lot, particularly in Kodshim, we've got to go through some technical learning in order to extract the principle and understand that this is a Torah principle. The only way we can be sure that an idea is an authentic Torah principle is if it's extrapolated out of the Torah. Otherwise, one can say anything is a Torah principle. And so we need to go through the discipline of working this out through the Gemara. And if you're not up to the technical level of the learning, then just let it flow through you. Just listen to it, let it flow through you. Over a period of time of listening to the Matmonim, you'll become familiar with a lot of principles of the Torah, particularly we're talking about the laws of the Beis Hamikdash, the temple laws, things that you're unfamiliar with. Little by little, you'll become more and more familiar, even if you're not following the details of the technical learning that we're going through. And this is such an example. This really started with a question that Mr. Gachin, that's Uriel's father, asked me at the Hakofis on Simchas Torah on the Shir on Daf Chofhei Amud Aleph, where I explained that the idea of nishpach al haritzpa is that once the blood falls on the floor of the Beis Hamikdash, the blood comes out of the animal, out of the bull, falls onto the floor, it can't be collected again and then put into the kli, to be put into the utensil, because the idea of Kabbalah, the idea of receiving the blood, as we learned in the Sifri and in the Vilna Gaon, is to receive the blood from the bull. And we discussed that. And Mr. Gachin asked, how do I know that that's the reason, that it's because you can't receive the blood from the bull anymore? That's the receiving has been disrupted by the fall, the spillage onto the floor. Maybe it's because it's not nice to pick something up from the floor. Maybe it's because it's dochui. And this leads us into a discussion of the principle that we have back on Daf Yud Beis, and we'll have many times in Kodshim, of hoil v'nidche yidoche. Once an object has been disqualified for use on the Mizbeach, or other usages as well, but let's focus on the Mizbeach. Once something has been disqualified for use on the Mizbeach, even if the reason for its disqualification is later removed, the item remains disqualified. It doesn't help just removing the reason for the disqualification. Once it's disqualified, it remains disqualified. That's a principle that we're going to work with. So Mr. Gachin said, maybe since it's disqualified, it fell onto the floor, yidoche, it can't be used again, and maybe it hasn't got anything to do with the whole idea that we developed of the receiving. And I explained to him, based on a Tosfos in Krisus Daf Zayin, that there's a difference between when the reason for the disqualification is in the object itself, or the reason for the disqualification is in activity, in actions. If the object has become completely pasul, it's become disqualified. If the blood were to become disqualified for it because of a problem in the blood, then it can't be requalified. However, if the disqualification is just from activity, that he wasn't able to receive the blood from the animal, that could be repaired. He could now pick it up again. When it's just from an activity, that principle doesn't apply. Now, we're going to go into this in more detail. After Mr. Gachin's question, I thought about it a lot, and it led us into today's sugya, which will take us more deeply into this and explain it more accurately in a more nuanced way. Because our Gemara deals with the following question. Okay, we learned on Daf Chofhei that if the blood spills onto the floor, that act of receiving has been messed up. the Kohen did not receive it from the bull. The bull wants to give his blood to the Kohen. The Kohen's there supposed to receive it. Instead, the blood falls onto the floor. Now the Kohen wants to mop the blood off the floor and put it back into the Kli. It's not just about having the blood in the utensil. It's about receiving the blood from the bull, and that's no longer possible. Okay, so we get that. What would happen if the spillage takes place after he's received it? So he did actually receive it. The bull is slaughtered, the bull is shechted, he gives his blood, the Kohen receives it into the receptacle, but his hand's a little shaky, and the blood spills from the receptacle onto the floor. Our Mishnah on Daf Lamed Beis gives that very case, and says, nishpach min hakli al haritzpa. If it falls from the kli, from the utensil onto the floor, not from the bull's neck, it went from the neck to the utensil and from the utensil to the floor. Va'asafo, and the Kohen quickly picks it up from the floor and puts it back into the utensil. Kasher, that's okay, that works well. So we see firstly, in terms of Mr. Gachen's question, it's not because there's something wrong with the floor and the floor dirties the blood and the blood can't be used anymore. You see, the blood can be used. That's not the problem. The problem is in the Kabbalah. Once the Kabbalah took place, once there was a good receiving, if it then spills, you can pick it up and reuse the blood. Asks the Gemara on Daf Lamed Daled, 2 daf further, why don't we say here, kivan shenidche? The fact is, while it was on the floor, it wasn't usable. So there was a period of time at which it was disqualified. It wasn't in the kli. Yes, it had come out of the neck of the bull, and it had entered the utensil, but it's no longer in the utensil. You can't take it to the Mizbeach from the floor. And why don't we say kivan shenidche yidoche? Asks the Gemara. Answers Rav Ashi, an important principle. Kol shebiyado lo havidichui. If you're able to fix the disqualification, that's not called disqualification. It was never really disqualified. It's not that here, yes, even though it was disqualified, it can be requalified. No, says Rav Ashi, that's not what disqualification means. If you have the capacity to repair the disqualification, it wasn't a disqualification to start. That's what Rav Ashi says. Explains Tosfos, that is only where it is in fact a mitzvah to do so. This is Tosfos on Daf Lamed Daled. Says it's not that you have the ability to fix it. Where the Torah says to you, you need to fix this problem. You can't leave it where it is. That's when it's not called dichri, because the Torah is telling you it's not disqualified. The Torah is telling you it's very much qualified. Fix the problem and get going. Don't push it aside. And in this case, the Tosfos holds it's a mitzvah to pick the blood up and put it back into the utensil. And therefore, this is not a case of dachui. The blood is not disqualified while it's on the floor. Even while it's on the floor, it's waiting to be picked up. And it may be picked up. In fact, it must be picked up. That's not called disqualification. That's what Tosfos says. Asks the Or Sameach. The Or Sameach, the Rav of Dvinsk, who wrote the Meshech Chochma, also died at the beginning of the 20th century. The Or Sameach asks, but this Tosfos is in contradiction to a Tosfos that we have in Me'ilah. In Me'ilah, we have a Tosfos that quite clearly says, while it's discussing a related issue, perhaps we've got to consider the blood on the floor as lost. It's gone. There's nothing you can do with it anymore, because there's no mitzvah to pick it up, to lift it up. Says the Osamach, that's in direct contradiction to our Tosfos. And if you'll say, yes, that's a Tosfos in Me'ilah, and this is a Tosfos in Zevachim, very often Tosfos in different Masechtas are written by different people, and they don't always align. Firstly, we try to avoid that if we can explain it any other way. And secondly, there's also the Osamach works on a Tosfos on Daf Yud Gimel in our Masechta, back on Daf Yud Gimel on the Beis, where that Tosfos also seems to imply that there's no mitzvah that you've got to pick this blood up. So again, the blood is being received by the Kohen from the bull into the utensil. It spills out of the utensil onto the floor. Our Mishnah says clearly if he picks it up from the floor, he may continue with the avodah. The service can continue. The question is, should he pick it up from the floor or should he leave it on the floor? Tosfos further on Daf Lamed Daled says he has to pick it up, and that's why it's not dochli. If it weren't that he had to pick up, it would be considered disqualifying. The fact that you're allowed to pick it up doesn't make it doesn't cause it not to be disqualified. It's only if you have to pick it up. Ask the Osamach, but the Tosfos says in Meila and on Daf Yomi Zevachim further back, the Tosfos says that it's not a mitzvah to pick up. You may pick it up, not that you have to pick it up. And the Osamach answers the question and says that it depends whether there's more blood left. Did it all spill, or did some of it spill? If it all spilled, you can't continue with the service. You can't do zrika. You won't be able to throw the blood on the Mizbeach, and the whole avodah is messed up. This whole sacrifice is then messed up. In such a case, since you're allowed to pick up the blood, you must pick up the blood. You can't just interrupt the whole process and say there's no blood. The blood's on the floor. Well, pick it up from the floor and put it back into the kli, and then carry on with the service. Carry on with the avodah. However, if there is blood left in the utensil, then there's no mitzvah to go mopping up the blood that's on the floor. You can continue the service without mopping the blood that's on the floor. That's how the Osamach resolves the difficulty. And that's fine, but interestingly enough, there's a Sfas Emes. Sfas Emes is the third Geir Rebbe. He's a grandson of the Kiddushei HaRim, founded the Geir Hasidus, and in fact, he's really considered the successor of the Kiddushei HaRim, because there was another Rebbe that was only for a short period of time, but the Sfas Emes, who was very young at the time, became the third Geir Rebbe, and he wrote his philosophic works on the Torah, the Sfas Emes on the Torah, and his halachic works on the Gemara. And it's as we've often said, the Lithuanian canon includes the works of those Hasidic authorities who were great in Gemara, because that it doesn't help to be just great in Kabbalah, or just great in philosophy, or just great in Drush. The greatness of learning, the indication that you've mastered the methodology of learning, is your capacity to extrapolate ideas from the Gemara and understand the Gemara very clearly. Once you've got that, you can apply that methodology to Kabbalah and to Drush and to philosophy and Hashkafa and other areas. And the Sfas Emes is such an example, as was his grandfather, the Kiddushei HaRim. They wrote incredibly powerful Lomdishes Sforim, books of enormous scholarship on the Talmud, on the Gemara itself. And they wrote philosophic works, which were the works of Hasidus, which were the foundation of the Geir of Hasidim later on. But we use the Sfas Emes a lot, and the Sfas Emes says, after going through, he says exactly the same as the Osamach does. It's interesting, they're contemporaries, they lived at the same time. And they say they answer this, they both raise the question, and they both answer it, and they both answer it in the same way. And they don't reference one another. It's possible they never saw each other's works. And the Sfas Emes suggests the same answer as the Osamach does, but he's not happy with it. In the end, he says, I'm not sure that Tosfos's idea here on Daf Lamed Daled is necessarily accurate. It might be a generality, but isn't really accurate. Diyesh lomar afilu shelo b'mokom mitzvah kol shebiyado lo havidin. The principle, the underlying principle, says the Sfas Emes, is, can you fix it or can't you fix it? Tosfos says the underlying principle is, must you fix it or may you leave it? If you may leave it, that's called it's disqualified. You don't have to fix it. So the Sfas Emes, based on the Tosfos on Daf Yud Gimel and the Tosfos in Meila, the Sfas Emes says the real principle here, the real foundational principle, is not whether you have to fix it, but is it possible to fix? Is it something you can fix? Then you need to fix it. It's not called a disqualification. And therefore, in our case, since you can pick the blood up, and you can continue using it because you did a good Kabbalah. What was wrong with blood on the floor? We learned on Daf Kafei. The whole problem with blood on the floor is there wasn't a proper Kabbalah. You didn't receive it. But in this case, you did receive it. Now the blood's on the floor. There's nothing wrong with the blood on the floor. Pick it up and continue. That's not called a disqualification. It was just temporarily unusable, but that can easily be fixed. And here we have that idea. Kol shebiyado lo havi dichui. If you can fix something, it's not a disqualification. If you can fix something, it's not a problem. It's a mindset that one has to have when you're looking at a problem. The first thing you look at, you've got to divide problems up and just say, is this a problem that needs to be fixed? Or is this a problem that needs another way to approach it? Reb Chaim Shmulevitz used to say in his shiurim in the yeshiva that when Rabbi Kiva Eger, in the Gilayon HaShat, Rabbi Kiva Eger wrote notes on the sides of the Gemara called Giloy and Ashas. And very often he asks a question and says, "V'tzarich," and he doesn't answer it. He just says, "This is a question. I'm raising a question. I don't have an answer." Reb Chaim Shmulevitz used to say to us, "Don't waste your time trying to answer it," as many people do. If Rabbi Kiva Eger says "V'tzarich iyun," it means this is one of those problems that can't be answered, and indicates you've learned the Gemara wrong. If you've hit this problem, says Rabbi Kiva Eger, basically, take a step back and learn the Gemara differently so that you don't have the problem. This is not a problem to be solved. And so both in learning and in life, there are problems to be solved, and there are problems that are indicators you've gone down the wrong road, and you've got to know when it's the wrong road and stop wasting your time trying to find the right road. Go back to the last crossroad and take a different turning because you've hit a stone wall. That's what one really needs to have. So what's interesting here is the Gemara goes in on Daf Lamed Daled, the whole question on our Mishnah here on Lamed Beis as to whether there is dichui or there isn't. In this case of the blood falling out of the utensil onto the floor, is there dichui? Is that called disqualification? Why does the Gemara not ask it on Daf Chafei when the blood falls directly to the ground? The answer is because it is dichui. Mr. Goffin is right. It is dichui. The only thing is that it's not disqualified because of dichui. It's dichui because it's disqualified. So then the order of things is there wasn't a Kabbalah. There wasn't a proper receiving. The blood is now on the floor. Since there wasn't a proper receiving and the blood is on the floor, you can't pick the blood up and use it again. Since you can't pick up the blood and use it, it is dichui. It is disqualified and can't be requalified. It's just, that's not relevant. Because in any case, you can't reuse it because there wasn't a Kabbalah. But technically speaking, yes, that's an example of a problem that can't be fixed. What can you do with this blood? It's on the floor. You haven't yet done Kabbalah. You can't do Kabbalah with blood that's on the floor. You can't receive blood from a bull if his blood is on the floor. Therefore, this is a problem that can't be solved. It's an example of a problem that can't be solved. You've got to go back and either use blood that's left over, that there's still other blood that can be used, or you have to start the korban again. This korban can't be salvaged. But in our case here on Daf Lamed Beis, where there has been a Kabbalah, and now the blood has fallen on the ground, there you certainly can pick it up, and this is a problem that can be solved. And according to Tosfos on Daf Lamed Daled, a problem that must be solved. You can't just leave it and start the korban again. You've got to solve the problem. And so we see clearly that nuanced idea of problems. There are those problems that cannot be solved and you need to find a new way. There are those problems that can be solved and you may and should find a way to fix it. And there are some problems that there's a mitzvah. You've got to solve this problem. This is a problem to be solved, and one needs to solve it. Very often when the poskim are dealing with a shaila, that's one of the things they have to look at. A person comes and says, I have a problem. Now, this is but this is incredibly problematic in my life situation. And the posik has to say, is this a problem that can be solved? In which case I need to solve it. Or is this a problem that can't be solved? Sometimes the problem can't be solved, and we have to find another way of coming at it.